Hello, friends, and welcome to another podcast episode of newly named Nourishing Reality with Salima. This week, we're going to talk about the rising epidemic of clinical depression and suicide, and it's affectionately called Bearing the Unbearable, the worrying epidemic rise of clinical depression and suicide. If you're listening and not reading, if you head over to the Substack post, you'll see a beautifully depicted piece of artwork by Animir Mundi Herbs, and depicted is hormones, neurotransmitters, and basically how to unlock happiness chemicals. So do give that a little look. This week, it's a rather heartfelt piece from my personal experience of living with someone who has clinical depression and thoughts of suicide. So grab your coffee and your notebook if you want to, and let's dive in. So I've been thinking of writing about the experience and learnings from this journey thus far for a while, but it is a hugely personal and vulnerable undertaking to do so. And until now, I just didn't feel I had the strength nor even a handle on it to be able to. So I'm glad that it's finally here. I really wanted to do something to raise awareness and support for those who have mental health disorders, and also for the loved ones around them, like myself. Alongside the processes you have to undertake and the support currently available here in the UK, because I'm based in the UK, obviously it may be different where you are. So, unless you've been living under a rock for the last decade, then you'll be aware of the rising epidemic of mental health disorders, especially those of clinical depression and suicide. Although research would tend to suggest that ADHD and autism are also on the rise in slightly older people as well. Even now, we're facing an unprecedented epidemic of mental health disorders of seismic proportions, and not being helped by COVID-19, obviously. However, that being said, before the pandemic, there were already causes for concern amongst the medical psychological professions of not having enough qualified therapists to meet demand. And sadly, this has only got a lot worse since COVID, and something that I've experienced personally in the last few months. So, in this week's podcast, I explore some of the other concerns surrounding mental health and the serious lack of proper support to help those suffering and their loved ones. The system has to change. There has to be proper processes, and it needs a reform. It needs an overhaul. Here in the UK, again, it may be different where you are, but in general, we need a much needed reform. Having experienced a bit very briefly during COVID-19, a period of depression and anxiety myself, I was lucky enough to find my way through it with some good professional support, I have to say, along with yoga and meditation. And it really helped, those things combined really helped recultivate my resilience in the process. So I'm very grateful for that. Whilst in the past I provided some service to those with mild stress and anxiety, I've never treated anyone with serious depression. Why? Well, mainly because, most importantly, I'm not qualified to do so. In brackets, even though I do have a foundational degree in cognitive experimental psychology. And secondly, it's such a complex field to navigate. However, what I have learned and experienced as a result of my academic studies is a basic understanding of how our brains work and how that affects our behaviours. This in itself has proved to be an invaluable source of help in rising to my most recent challenges. Today, again, I speak from first-hand experience, on this occasion not about my struggles, but of those of my partner. And like I say, I've been thinking about writing this for a while, but it's a hugely personal, vulnerable thing to do. One of the most interesting and complex things that I've had real difficulty with has been understanding the difference in my mindset and beliefs to that of my partner's. What I mean by that is simply how I choose to see things, even in the most darkest of times. I somehow still manage to cling on to hope and optimism, yet my partner just cannot muster any remnants of either of these things, instead, preferring just to sleep, in brackets, and not wake up. His words and not mine. Something that I cannot simply identify with being the exact opposite, and also of having experienced so much death from an early age and traumas along the way, but I still love life. So, what can you do in that situation? Well, firstly, I've been working on my wounded inner child natter of, oh, well, he can't really love me if that's the way he wants to go, etc., etc., which, I'm not lying, has been personally very challenging to balance that with loving kindness. My mentor, Elena Brower, had some wise words for me a few weeks ago when she said, just listen and don't try to fix. That being said, sometimes that just isn't enough. And due to the seriousness of my partner's illness, clinical interventions had to be made. The concerning lack of the therapist couch. I don't know about you, but I grew up and watched a lot of American TV shows and movies in the late 70s, early mid 80s. And what I noticed now was there was always somebody on a therapist's couch. In American culture, a visit to the therapist was and is still considered pretty normal, just like going to the dentist. Yet in the UK, in brackets always behind the US, it still has not really reached the same accord. Hopeful that my partner would get the help he needed and indeed be invited to a therapist's couch for some proper life assessment, we were presented, unfortunately, with the absolute opposite here in the UK in brackets. A systematic, catastrophic failure. It's the only way I can describe it. I feel I can talk openly and honestly about how the system works here because I've been through the whole journey, and as of yet, we still not have received a satisfactory outcome. So, this is generally what you're subjected to here in the UK as a patient with a mental health disorder. 1. You go see the doctor who refers you to your local mental health team, generally waiting anywhere between 4 and 8 weeks before you speak to somebody, in brackets. Meantime, if you're about to self-harm, call treble 1 or treble 9 or go to A&E. More about this at the end of this post, where I include some other numbers and some more useful points of contact. 2. After the referral to the local mental health team, you are often offered some form of talking therapy, normally CBT, in brackets, which, by the way, does not always help because it's dependent on the type of mental health disorder you have. CBT is not a problem solved for clinical depression. FYI. 3. If you are requesting to see a psychiatrist because you tried everything else thus far from what I've just said, it's simply not possible via the doctors or the NHS here in the UK. Instead, and this is where the system is really broken, doctors have to go via a third-party psychiatrist, one who does not see the patient and instead relies on information from the doctor's notes, who is not a psychologist, in order to make a diagnosis and recommended treatment options. Generally, the result is, or our personal experience has been, medicate, medicate, medicate. It seems to be the cure here in the UK. Instead of finding the root cause, in brackets, normally through some childhood trauma or event. 4, pay privately, in brackets, if you can afford it, of course. Typically, £180 for about 30 minutes will get you a consultation with a psychiatrist and a mini assessment. However, even the last 2 that my partner saw only spoke about upping and adding to his medication. Nothing about his family history, how long he's been suffering with depression, which is about 20 years now, 15 to 20 years. Nothing. Just medicate, medicate, medicate. Sorry, not the answer. Yes, you may need medication dependent on what type of mental health disorder you have, schizophrenia, bipolar. Yes, a lot of these disorders do need to be medicated, but the answer doesn't lie in doping people up to the eyeballs. Instead, we need to find the root cause and try and help people rehabilitate. We know that mental health comes from a chemical imbalance in the brain. So, surely we need to set about why that is happening. I cannot tell you how many times that my partner has been on the brink of self harming and not wanted to continue with his life over the past year. What to do? What could I do? It's heartbreaking. There have been times when I feel my heart has been broken over and over again because no one is really willing to help. Plus, it's triggered me, reminders of how I felt when my father passed away as a child and again later in life when I lost my best friend, my mama, all resurfacing. It was and it has been tough. What I realised during this time was how this was beginning to affect my own sunny disposition, outlook, mental and general health, which got me to thinking of others who are living with similar challenges and situations. Who can you speak to about what you're going through? How on earth can others even begin to understand unless they have gone through something similar? These are just some of the questions that are bubbling away under the surface. Personally, I've gone through a range of emotions from despair to frustration to isolation and everything in between. It's been a real roller coaster of a ride. So, what is the support available for partners and family for those who have a serious mental health disorder? Well, I'm about to tell you, so listen and read on. Psychoeducation is an emerging treatment, and this was mentioned finally by one of the psychiatrists my partner saw privately. It's an evidence based therapeutic intervention geared up for patients and their loved ones. And what it aims to do is provide information and support to better understand and cope with the illness/slash disorder. This is generally undertaken by obviously qualified counsellors or psychotherapists. The goals of this emerging treatment being to communicate basic knowledge and competence of patients and their relatives about the illness/slash disorder they are experiencing and or being diagnosed with, to provide insight into the illness, to help promote relapse prevention, and to also engage in crisis management and suicide prevention. The essential components of psychoeducation sessions are: they look at common signs and symptoms, awareness regarding the early signs of a relapse or a reoccurrence, how to cope with the situation, various treatment options available, when and how to seek treatment, the do's and don'ts for family members while dealing with the patient and their disorder, and clearing myths and misconceptions, dispelling stigma. And these are just a few. It's worth noting that psychoeducation can be individual, family, group, or community based. And the benefits of this intervention are that you have interactive sessions between the therapist, patient, and family members. You get support advice relative to the specific disorder in the form of information leaflets and audio, providing you with knowledge about the psychiatric illness and how to manage it, and also to help develop certain skills so that family members can manage the illness/slash disorder more effectively. And a really important element here is support groups for the family members and partners of the patients in sharing their feelings. Now, there was a great study done back in 2020. It's an Indian study. And if you are reading this, you'll see the link for the research paper underneath. I'm going to read an extract from this paper. And in this research, they break down a number of mental health conditions/disorders I'm not going to read all of that, obviously, because it's very long. For the purpose of this piece, I am reading the part that is geared up for depressive and anxiety related disorders. And this is what the research says. After a diagnosis of anxiety and or a depressive disorder and performing necessary assessments, the mental health professional should provide detailed information to the patient regarding the symptoms, causes, various treatment options, side effects of medications, and overall course and outcome of the disorder. Apart from medications, the role of non-pharmacological measures such as activity scheduling and regular physical exercise is emphasized. Passive psychoeducation is very popular in patients with anxiety disorders. This involves passing on to the patients various resources such as books, videos, audio, which explain clearly various aspects of anxiety disorders. Unlike active psychoeducation, where the therapist does not interact actively with the patient while imparting education about the illness. So, this is taken from a paper called Clinical Practice Guidelines for Psychoeducation in Psychiatric Disorders and the General Principles of Psychoeducation. As I say, if you're listening to this and you're not on the written post, head over to the written post and you can access the link there. So, if you or someone you know is struggling, here are some resources you can reach out to for support via the charities here in the UK. Suicide Helplines UK, Stay Live, Calm, Shout, Samaritans, NHS, and MindSane. And the numbers are next to these. So for MindSane, you can ring 0300 304 7000. If you're ringing 111 NHS, it's option 2. If you're ringing the Samaritans, it's 116 123. If it's Shout, you can text Shout to 85258 and someone will come back to you. And the Calm helpline is 0800 58 58 58. Remember, stay alert for critical signs for yourself or loved ones and seek help straight away. Even if the system is broken, these charities can really save lives. It can really help save your sanity. So don't be ashamed. If you need help, seek help and ring one of the numbers that I've given you here. Thank you for listening and reading. Please feel free to share this if you know of anyone who is struggling with their mental health right now. But remember, please seek help urgently. I hope that you have found this post somewhat inspiring, supportive, informative. Please feel free to reach out on Substack and direct message me if you'd like more information or if you have any thoughts. Please hit that up in the comments box. Otherwise, until next time, stay safe and nourish your reality with loving kindness.